cold has nothing to do with the angle of sunlight. That is taught in schools, and it's entirely false. The reason the poles are cold is because the magnetic force lines of our planet draw down highly charged particles, which in turn basically exclude air and, if you will, bring space in closer to the poles, causing it to be colder up there. The atmosphere is demonstrably thinner, and the magnetic poles bring down this high energy, and it freezes things very rapidly. This is independent of light. So it's quite probable that you could be moved into this band and freeze very quickly. And there's tons of stuff in Alaska in terms of the things that are currently frozen in the permafrost, as well as Siberia, to suggest that that's exactly what occurred. Was that 11,802 years ago, the rotation moved Siberia into what is now its current position. But prior to that, it was down, if you want to think about it that way, in the latitudes of where Japan is, and was much more tropical.
Oh, my gosh. So we're basically looking at a major shift in the face of the Earth, humanity will essentially be destroyed, maybe a 90% death curve? I mean, do you have any projections on this?
98% appears 98%. to be. Yeah.
Yes, that includes the winds that could go up to 800 miles an hour in total.
No. See, there we have some issues. There are certain physical limitations that have not in the past pole shifts ever been exceeded. If you got winds of that speed, the atmosphere would heat to the level where we were looking at 2,000 degrees atmospheric temperatures, and the oceans would boil. This would cause all life to cease, and that does not appear to have been the case. So we do have some indications. For instance, the last pole shift ground up all these bones of all the of whales and cows, all kinds of creatures, of all humans, just anything it could find, and took them 800 feet up into some of these fjords in Norway and those areas. So we know, for instance, that was the height at which the maximum level of deposit was occurring from the wave. So we can actually postulate that the wave was probably not much more than a kilometer high. So we can make some assumptions. And those assumptions really don't go to the idea of life-scrubbing 800-mile-an-hour winds, although we may well face wind structures that are probably 200 to maybe 300 miles per hour coming close to the surface. There's all kinds of issues there with the other things that are going on at the time that have a tendency to disrupt the atmosphere, such as the potential for a sinking continent, more land rising, disruption through mountains, and this sort of thing. But still, not a good time.
Which brings me about the archaeologist assassinations and the secrets revealed that the antiquities found that would just totally change the written human history that we have. Would you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, and actually that kind of blends into the alien wars thing. Those come in within our area of the officially denied, and things that are unknown. When I started this work back in '97, I wasn't smart enough to create a bin where we could just put stuff that's unknown or officially denied. I was rather naive and just went about assuming that the world was as had been portrayed. And that's when I ran into things like this. But the devices that we're seeing within our data are an archetype suggestion that there's going to be a leak of, if you will, ancient technology, maybe from previous civilizations, that's being kept under wraps. And it will happen during this next couple of years simply because things are so tight up against a very large fear boundary, which is 2012.
And then when you talk about the archaeologist getting assassinated, of course that makes me think of Egypt and Hawass. I noticed.
Yeah, I was very careful about that
yes, you were.
because we don't, as a rule, we don't deal with names. We keep names and have this structure we call the model of model space, and that's the only place we really hunt for known personalities occasionally. And in this case, I don't have any indication that it would be him, but enough of the traits seem to point in that direction. And we're seeing strange stuff now along those lines that may prompt just such an act. Because, for instance, we now find out that they're building walls all around the Giza Plateau to prevent tunneling.
Yes.
Illegal, if you will, digs going on that they don't like, and they have gone into major control mode, all of which ends in the late 2012, by the way. Curious timing on that.
Cliff, could these tunnels be a search for ancient technology?
Correct, the supposed Hall of Records kind of stuff, exactly.
And could be maybe looking for a way to somehow bypass or avoid what's coming?
I don't know that there's a feasibility of that. This may be. At first, the opinion was that the big squeeze was somehow related to the galactic alignment. This current structure of our thinking, that it's entirely solar dependent and relates to how fast the sun spins at the equator versus the poles, it rules out the need for anything extrasolar, so it accommodates the more frequent pole shifts because we don't as frequently align with the galactic center. But it may be a natural part of the whole process of refreshing all the planets. In other words, our magnetosphere has been degrading for the last 11,000 years, and it's gotten to the point where it's got huge holes in it, and we're suffering the consequence of that through solar radiation. Without a recharge of the magnetosphere, we would progress to the point where it would degrade more than 80%, if you will, of coverage of the planet, and at that point we start baking out in radiation like the moon, and we would be a dead husk. So we need to have it recharged.
Is that what you're calling the sun disease?
Exactly. That was our first hints of this, was data in 1997 that kept showing the sun relative to disease. And over the years we've thought, well, maybe it means too much sun and everybody's going to get, skin cancer. No, that didn't turn out to be it. Finally, it kept going to the point where it resolved down to the sun itself is diseased, if you will, but it's not like a malignant tumor or anything. It is like the word dis-ease in the sense that we think that because of the magnetic twisting, the sun gets all magnetically bound up and has to refresh itself by releasing this. And at that point, the huge magnetic bubble that hits us not only flips our poles over and causes all kinds of other disruption, but at that point does positive things like massively recharging the magnetosphere. Which, curiously, if you wanted to really get out into speculation and woo-woo land, what if our magnetic forces that affect the planet suddenly jumped 5, 6, 7,000% or greater? We could then postulate that some of these seemingly inert rocks that are extremely iron-laden could be subjected to magnetic forces for moving them, and all of a sudden building things like the pyramids becomes less of a hassle. Because, we cannot duplicate those today.
Yes.
And there's huge slabs, for instance. One that currently underlies all of the Temple Mount turns out to be a giant monolith created who knows how many 100,000 years ago and moved into that position. And we couldn't duplicate it. We don't even have cranes that could lift the 1,000-ton arch that is standing up in Uruguay, I think it is.
Does the Webbot tell us anything about the powers that be and how they're going to try to survive this calamity?
Yeah, it looks like they're going to try underground. We have repeated sources within the powers that be that have gone to a huge ratcheting up of their fear levels on all different levels, about all different kinds of things. But in the end, it's all backstopped by their impression that time is short. And it's difficult for me to convey what this is in terms of how we see it. But from our viewpoint, the populace of the USA entity, for instance, has a long-term view in it. People are talking about things at an archetype level that we pick up that go out 10 generations. They're making plans that, even though we don't really think about ourselves as long-term planners, indeed have archetype language that goes way out. And we don't find that anymore with the powers that be. The minion class still has a quasi-way-out view that goes out, say, 2021, something like that. But the powers that be at the upper echelon level appear to have a fear backstop that runs right into 2013 and doesn't go much further.
So there is an end coming to the powers that be.
Well, they fear. I think so, but that's a conclusion, that's not necessarily justified by the reports at the moment. The data sources would seem to suggest that the powers that be themselves run into some serious trouble over these next 2 years because the chaos gets out of hand in a sense, and a lot of problems then roll back on them. Whether or not they survive as a group into 2013 is not anything I would care to really wager money on at this stage. I think that it may get to the point where if the revolution happens as we think, planet-wide, then there may be basically a powers that be hunt in 2011 that might be reminiscent of something like, might be seen in the Bolshevik Revolution. We might see hundreds of thousands of people killed just because of their association with these individuals. Doesn't necessarily mean that
the Webbot by bankers assassinated.
I'm sorry?
This is what you're talking about,
Correct.
the Webbot by bankers assassinated?
Yeah, and it'll be, if we're correct, we have extremes of language, so usually it's not as dire as it comes out in our data. But if we're correct, it will extend the minion classes that will be identified as by the mob, if you will, of the populace gone amok, as being associated with the people that cause them misery. So it won't just be the super rich; it'll be their PR flacks and the propagandists on TV had better watch out. Anybody that's well known won't survive too long outside their local environments once things start getting really hot.
And you also mentioned, go ahead, Annie.
The coup d'etat that you talk about by the military SOCs.
Yeah.
I thought that was very interesting.